March 22nd, 1964. Exactly 7:18 p.m. The lamb chops arrived at the table with steam rising like morning fog off the Hudson. 4 bone-in cuts, perfectly charred, resting on a bed of rosemary potatoes that glistened with butter and garlic. The kind of meal that made men forget they were in Harlem and not some fancy steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan. Bumpy Johnson cut into the first chop. The knife slid through the meat like it was cutting through silk. Pink in the center, seared black on the edges. He raised the first bite to his mouth, chewed twice, and then his jaw slowed. Not stopped. Slowed. The taste was perfect. The texture was perfect. But there was something underneath. Something chemical. Something that didn't belong in lamb, rosemary, or butter. Something that tasted like the air smells right before a thunderstorm, metallic and wrong. 17 years of survival had taught Bumpy Johnson to trust his instincts before his logic. When you've survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 prison riots, and a knife fight with a man who outweighed you by 80 pounds, you learn that your body knows things your brain hasn't figured out yet. Bumpy swallowed, felt the food slide down his throat, felt it hit his stomach like a stone dropping into still water. Then he reached for his wine glass, took a slow sip, let the burgundy wash over his tongue. Metallic. Still metallic. He set the glass down gently. Across the table, Frank Lucas was cutting into his own plate, oblivious. Young, hungry, always eating like the world might run out of food tomorrow. Bumpy raised one finger. Slight, barely visible. But Frank saw it, and his fork stopped midair. Something wrong, Bump? Bumpy didn't answer. His eyes moved across the dining room of Moretti's. Angelo Moretti's restaurant. 136th Street and Lenox Avenue. Been there for 11 years. Bumpy had been eating here every other Sunday for the last 5. Same table. Same order. Same man bringing the food. Angelo himself was behind the bar, wiping down glasses that were already clean. Watching. Not looking directly at Bumpy, but watching the way a cat watches a mouse it's already caught. Bumpy picked up his napkin, dabbed his lips like a gentleman at a society dinner. When he set it down, his voice was quiet. So quiet Frank had to lean forward to hear it. Don't touch your food. Frank's fork clattered against the plate. What? Don't touch your food. Bumpy stood slowly, adjusted his cufflinks. His 3-piece suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, not a thread out of place. We're leaving. But now. They walked out of Moretti's at 7:24 p.m. Bumpy moved with the same measured pace he always did. Not hurried. Not slow. Just deliberate. Behind them, Angelo Moretti watched from behind the bar, and if you were looking close enough, you would have seen his hand tremble when he reached for the whiskey bottle. Outside, Bumpy's Cadillac was waiting at the curb. Curtis, his driver, had the engine running before Bumpy's hand touched the door. Take us to the brownstone, Bumpy said. Then he turned to Frank. Call Juno. Tell him I need him and Nat at my house within the hour. Tell him it's about Moretti's. Frank's eyes widened. You think Angelo? I don't think. I know. Someone put chloral hydrate in my lamb chops. Enough to knock out a man twice my size. Bumpy's voice was calm. Too calm. The only question is why. And by midnight, I'm going to have an answer. The Cadillac pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, Curtis watched Moretti's disappear into the Harlem night. Inside the restaurant, the Sunday dinner crowd kept eating, laughing, drinking. None of them knew that by this time tomorrow, Moretti's would be closed forever. And Angelo Moretti would wish he'd never been born. Bumpy's parlor at 8:47 p.m. Mamie set down the tea service and studied her husband's face. 32 years of marriage had taught her to read the weather in his eyes. Tonight, there was a storm coming. Ellsworth, what happened? Bumpy took the teacup, sipped slowly. His hands were steady. They were always steady. Angelo Moretti tried to drug me tonight. Chloral hydrate in the lamb chops. Mamie's hand went to her throat. Lord have mercy. Why would Angelo? That's what I need to find out. He set the cup down. 5 years, Mamie. Every other Sunday. I trusted that man with my money, my time, my presence in his restaurant. That's worth more than gold in Harlem. And he tried to put me to sleep like I was some mark fresh off the bus from Alabama. The front door opened. Juno Brown walked in first, followed by Nat Pettigrew. Both men had the look of soldiers who'd been pulled from dinner and told to report for war. Bumpy laid out the situation. The lamb chops, the metallic taste, the way Angelo had watched from behind the bar. "I need to know who's been talking to Angelo," Bumpy said. "Who's got leverage on him? Who's got reason to want me unconscious in the middle of his restaurant on a Sunday night?" Nat pulled out a small notebook, flipped through pages covered in cramped handwriting. "Moretti's is clean on paper. No debts to the mob. No gambling problems. He pays his protection on time. Never late, never short." "What about family?" Juno asked. "Wife died 3 years ago. Cancer. No kids. Got a younger brother, Salvatore, who works in the kitchen. And a niece, Maria, who waitresses on weekends." Nat paused. "There's something else. 2 weeks ago, Angelo was seen having coffee with someone at a diner in the Bronx." "Who?" "Vincent DeLuca. They call him Vinny the Pipe." The room went quiet. Vinny the Pipe worked for Carlo Gambino. Not a soldier, not a made man, but a facilitator. The kind of guy who set up meetings, delivered messages, arranged things that needed arranging. If Vinny was talking to Angelo, it meant someone higher up wanted something. "Gambino's been quiet lately," Juno said. "Too quiet. After Gallo got sent up last year, the families have been restructuring, looking for new revenue streams." Bumpy stood, walked to the window. Harlem stretched out below him, all streetlights and shadows and secrets. Angelo's restaurant sits on prime real estate, 136th and Lenox, right in the heart of the numbers corridor. If Gambino wanted a foothold in Harlem without going through me, he trailed off. "He'd need to remove you first," Nat finished. "Not kill me. That would start a war. But drug me, make me vulnerable, make me look weak." Bumpy turned back to the room. A man unconscious in a restaurant is a man who can't protect himself, who can't protect his operation, who can't protect his territory. Juno cracked his knuckles. A sound like tree branches breaking. "You want me to bring Angelo in?" "Not yet. First, I need to know exactly what deal he made and with who." "Nat, I want you to find out everything about this meeting in the Bronx. Who else was there? What was said? How much money changed hands? And Angelo himself?" Bumpy's smile was thin and cold. "Angelo thinks I'm either unconscious in a hospital or dead in an alley by now. Let him keep thinking that. Let him get comfortable. Let him make mistakes." Nat stood. "I'll have answers by morning." "Make it dawn," Bumpy said quietly. "Because by noon tomorrow, Angelo Moretti is going to learn what happens when you poison the wrong man's dinner." March 23rd, 6:42 a.m. Nat returned to the brownstone with a manila folder thick with photographs and handwritten notes. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, but his information was solid. Bumpy read through the file in silence. Juno and Frank stood on either side, reading over his shoulder. The coffee meeting in the Bronx had lasted 47 minutes. 3 men, Angelo Moretti, Vinny the Pipe, and a third man identified as Thomas Greco, one of Carlo Gambino's accountants. The kind of man who turned violence into spreadsheets and made murder look like a business expense. According to Nat's source, a waiter who'd been close enough to overhear, the conversation had been simple. Angelo owed money, not to the mob, to a cancer hospital. His wife's treatment had cost $47,000 over 18 months. He'd sold his car, mortgaged his restaurant, borrowed from every friend he had. But the hospital wanted the rest, $22,000. And they wanted it in 60 days, or they'd put a lien on Moretti's. Gambino's people had made an offer. They'd pay off the debt. All of it. Clean. In exchange, Angelo would do one thing. Drug Bumpy Johnson's food. Not kill him. Just knock him out. Make him vulnerable. Make him look weak in front of his own people. And while Bumpy was unconscious, Gambino's men would move into Harlem, take over 3 numbers banks on 135th Street, and establish a foothold that Bumpy couldn't dislodge without starting a war. By the time Bumpy woke up, it would be too late. The Italians would be dug in, and Angelo would have his restaurant free and clear. "Son of a bitch," Frank whispered. Bumpy closed the folder slowly. His face was unreadable. Angelo's wife, Maria. What did she die from? Nat flipped through his notes. Ovarian cancer. Stage 4. Diagnosed in May of 61. Died February of 63. Harlem Hospital first, then moved to Memorial Sloan Kettering when it got bad. 2 years of watching her die. Bumpy's voice was quiet. 2 years of helplessness. 2 years of bills piling up while she got sicker. Juno shifted uncomfortably. That doesn't excuse what he did. No, it doesn't. Bumpy stood, walked to the window. Dawn was breaking over Harlem, painting the streets in shades of gray and gold. But it explains it. Desperation makes men do things they'd never consider otherwise. Angelo didn't want to betray me. He wanted to save his wife. And when he couldn't do that, he wanted to save her memory. Keep the restaurant she loved from being taken by creditors. So what do we do? Frank asked. Bumpy turned back to the room. His eyes were hard. We do what we always do. We send a message. Not just to Angelo. To everyone who thinks they can use Harlem as a bargaining chip. To every Italian mobster who thinks they can buy their way into my territory with blood money and broken promises. He paused. Tonight, we pay Angelo a visit. After closing time. Just me, Juno, and the truth. March 23rd, 11:47 p.m. Moretti's closed at 11:30 p.m. on Sundays. By 11:45, the last customer had stumbled out into the March cold, and Angelo was in the kitchen counting the night's receipts. He was alone. His brother Salvatore had left early, complaining about a headache. The waitstaff had cleaned the dining room and disappeared into the Harlem night. Just Angelo, a stack of bills, and the weight of what he'd done pressing down on his shoulders like a gravestone. He'd checked the newspapers all day. Nothing. No reports of Bumpy Johnson being hospitalized. No word on the street about the Harlem Godfather being unconscious. Just silence. And that silence was worse than any headline. The back door to the kitchen opened. No knock. No warning. Just the sudden cold rush of night air and 2 men stepping into the fluorescent light. Bumpy Johnson and Juno Brown. Angelo's hand froze halfway to the cash register. The stack of bills fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. Mr. Johnson, don't. Bumpy's voice was soft, almost gentle. Don't apologize. Don't explain. Don't lie. We're past all that now. He walked slowly through the kitchen, his footsteps echoing on the tile floor. His hand trailed along the stainless steel counter where hundreds of meals had been prepared, where Angelo had spent 11 years building something from nothing. You drug my food, Angelo. Chloral hydrate. Enough to put down a horse. Bumpy stopped in front of the refrigerator, studied his reflection in the steel door. The question is why, and I already know the answer. Angelo's legs gave out. He collapsed into a chair, his face in his hands. My wife. They said they'd pay for Maria's headstone. I couldn't even afford a proper marker. She's buried in a plot with just a number. No name. Nothing. So you sold me for $22,000 and a piece of marble. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. Bumpy turned to face him. You could have come to me. You could have asked for help. I've been eating in your restaurant for 5 years, Angelo. 5 years of Sunday dinners. You think I didn't notice when you started looking tired? When the smile didn't reach your eyes anymore? Angelo looked up, tears streaming down his face. You would have helped? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. Bumpy's voice was hard now. But you'll never know because you chose to betray me instead of trusting me. And now we're here, in your kitchen, after midnight, and you know what happens next. Juno stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. Angelo's eyes widened. Please, please, Mr. Johnson. I'll leave. I'll sell the restaurant. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. You're right about that. Bumpy walked to the stove, turned on one of the burners. Blue flame erupted in the darkness. But not the way you think. He gestured to the walk-in refrigerator. Juno opened it, started pulling out ingredients. Lamb chops, rosemary, potatoes, butter, garlic. All the components of the meal that Angelo had poisoned less than 24 hours ago. You're going to cook, Angelo, Bumpy said quietly. The same meal you served me last night. Every component, every garnish, every bite. Angelo's face went pale. What? And then you're going to eat it. All of it. Every single bite. Right here. Right now. Before closing time. But I didn't poison. I know you didn't poison the ingredients. Bumpy interrupted. The chloral hydrate was in the wine reduction. Easy to hide. Easy to dose. Easy to explain if anyone asked questions. He paused. But tonight, you're going to prepare that meal exactly the way you prepared it for me. With the same care, the same attention to detail, the same additions. Understanding dawned in Angelo's eyes. Horror followed close behind. You're going to drug yourself. And then you're going to eat every bite while I watch. Angelo's hands trembled as he tied on his apron. The kitchen that had been his sanctuary for 11 years suddenly felt like a tomb. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The refrigerator compressor clicked on and off like a metronome, counting down the seconds of his life. Bumpy sat at the small prep table in the corner, perfectly still. Juno stood by the door, arms crossed, face expressionless. Between them, Angelo moved through the familiar motions of preparing a meal he'd made 1,000 times. He trimmed the lamb chops, seasoned them with salt and black pepper. His hand shook so badly he dropped the peppermill twice. The sound of it clattering on the steel counter echoed like gunshots. "Take your time," Bumpy said. "We're not in a hurry. Closing time isn't until you've eaten the last bite." Angelo turned on the stove, heated the cast iron skillet until it smoked. He seared the lamb chops, 2 minutes on each side. The meat hissed and spat. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and savory, the same smell that had brought customers through his door for over a decade. While the meat rested, he started the rosemary potatoes. Quartered them, tossed them in duck fat and fresh herbs. Slid them into the oven at 425 degrees. Then came the wine reduction. Angelo stood in front of the wine rack, staring at the bottles like they were loaded guns. His hand hovered over a Burgundy from 1959, the same year he'd opened the restaurant, the same year he'd married Maria. "That one," Bumpy said, pointing. "The same bottle you used last night." Angelo's hand closed around the neck of the bottle. He could feel his pulse in his fingertips, rapid and erratic. He uncorked it, poured half the bottle into a saucepan, added shallots, thyme, a bay leaf. Then he reached for the locked cabinet beneath the sink. "Go on." Bumpy's voice was soft, almost kind. "You know what comes next." Inside the cabinet, hidden behind cleaning supplies, was a small brown bottle. No label, just a cork stopper and 2 ounces of clear liquid that looked like water but wasn't. Chloral hydrate. Angelo had bought it from a veterinarian in Queens. Told him he needed it to sedate his dog before a long car trip. Paid cash. Never used it until yesterday. His hand shook as he unstopped the bottle. The chemical smell hit him immediately, sharp and wrong. He measured out 3 drops. The same dose he'd used on Bumpy's meal. Enough to knock a man unconscious for 6 to 8 hours. Enough to make him vulnerable. Helpless. The drops fell into the wine reduction like rain into a dark ocean. Invisible. Undetectable. Lethal in its gentleness. He stirred the sauce, watched it reduce, watched the alcohol burn off and the flavors concentrate. When it was ready, thick and glossy and perfect, he plated the lamb chops, arranged the roasted potatoes, drizzled the drug reduction over everything in an artistic spiral. A masterpiece. A murder weapon disguised as a meal. Angelo set the plate on the prep table in front of Bumpy. The steam rose between them like a ghost. "Beautiful," Bumpy said. "You're a true artist, Angelo. A shame you use your art for poison." He pushed the plate back across the table. "Now eat." Angelo stared at the plate. The lamb chops stared back, perfectly cooked, exactly the way he'd prepared them 1,000 times before. Except this time, they were meant for him. "I can't." "You can." Bumpy's voice was calm, patient. "You created this meal. You calculated the dosage. You knew exactly what it would do to me. Now you're going to experience your own creation. Please, Mr. Johnson, I'll do anything. I'll eat." Juno took a step forward. The implied threat hung in the air like smoke. Angelo picked up the fork. His hand was shaking so badly the silverware rattled against the plate. He cut into the first lamb chop, separated a piece of meat, dragged it through the wine reduction. The same reduction he drugged. The same sauce he planned to use to destroy Bumpy Johnson. He raised the fork to his mouth. His hand stopped halfway. His body was rebelling, every instinct screaming at him to throw the plate across the room and run. But there was nowhere to run. Juno blocked the door. Bumpy blocked the truth. And Angelo Moretti was trapped in his own kitchen, holding a forkful of his own betrayal. He put the food in his mouth, chewed, swallowed. The taste was perfect. The lamb was tender, the seasoning flawless, the wine reduction rich and complex. For a moment, he forgot what he'd done. For a moment, it was just a meal. Then he tasted the metallic edge underneath. The chemical ghost. The thing that didn't belong. His stomach turned. "Keep eating," Bumpy said. "All of it. Every bite. Don't waste a drop of that sauce." Angelo ate. Slowly. Mechanically. Each bite was harder than the last. The lamb chops, the potatoes, the sauce. He scraped the plate clean, chewed until there was nothing left but the memory of what he'd created. By the time he finished, his vision was already starting to blur. The chloral hydrate was working, moving through his bloodstream like a thief in the night. His hands felt heavy, his tongue thick. "How long?" he managed to ask. "Until it kicks in?" "About 20 minutes. You dosed it well." Bumpy stood, adjusted his cufflinks. "Until you wake up?" 6 to 8 hours, depending on your metabolism. Angelo's head was swimming. The kitchen tilted and swayed like a ship in rough water. What happens when I wake up?" Bumpy studied him for a long moment. There was no anger in his eyes. No rage. Just something colder and more permanent. Disappointment. "When you wake up, your restaurant will be closed. Permanently. I've already bought the building from your creditors. They were happy to sell. Turns out a restaurant with debt problems and a poison scandal isn't worth much." Angelo tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. He slumped back into the chair. "The hospital debt? Paid in full. Your wife's grave? There'll be a headstone by the end of the week. Marble. Her name. Her dates. And a single rose carved into the stone, because that was her favorite flower." Bumpy walked to the door, stopped at the threshold. "I'm not a monster, Angelo. I'm just a man who demands loyalty. And you broke that trust. So, what happens to me? You're leaving New York. Tonight. There's a bus ticket in your coat pocket. Miami. Cash in the same pocket. Enough to start over. You'll never cook professionally again. I made sure every restaurant owner in 5 states knows what you did." Angelo's eyes were closing, the drug pulling him down into darkness. "Why? Why help me after what I did?" Bumpy's answer was quiet, almost sad. "Because Maria loved you. And despite everything, you loved her enough to betray me for her memory. That kind of love is rare. Stupid. Dangerous. But rare." He paused. "When you wake up, you'll remember this feeling. This helplessness. This fear. And you'll know that I could have done worse. That I showed mercy when I had every right to show none." Angelo tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The chloral hydrate had him now, dragging him down into unconscious darkness. His last conscious thought was of Maria, smiling, healthy, before the cancer, before the debt, before he destroyed everything to save her memory. He slumped forward onto the prep table, unconscious. Bumpy watched him for a moment, then nodded to Juno. "When he wakes up, make sure he's on that bus. I don't care if he's still groggy. I don't care if he can barely stand. He leaves New York tonight, and he never comes back. And if he tries, then the next meal he eats will be his last." They left Angelo unconscious in his own kitchen, surrounded by the tools of his trade, the plates still dirty with the evidence of his betrayal. By morning, Moretti's would have a "closed permanently" sign on the door. By the end of the week, it would be gutted and rebuilt into a social club that Bumpy's people would run. And Angelo Moretti would wake up in a Greyhound bus station in Baltimore, his pockets full of cash he didn't earn and guilt he couldn't spend. March 24th, 11:23 a.m. The story spread through Harlem like a fire through dry grass. By noon, every restaurant owner, every cook, every dishwasher between 110th Street and 155th Street knew what had happened at Moretti's. The details grew with each retelling. Some said Angelo had been forced to eat a week's worth of poisoned meals. Others said he'd been locked in his own freezer. A few claimed he'd disappeared entirely, buried somewhere beneath the Harlem River with the fishes. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. Bumpy Johnson had made Angelo Moretti eat his own poison, had watched him swallow every bite, had shown mercy where none was deserved. The message was clear. You could betray Bumpy Johnson. You could try to drug him, deceive him, destroy him. But if you failed, You'd spend the rest of your life tasting your own medicine. At the Lenox Lounge, Dutch Markham, who ran a breakfast joint on 132nd, told anyone who'd listen, "I'd rather serve Bumpy food poisoned by accident than food drugged on purpose. At least with an accident, you get to apologize." At the Cotton Club, Vincent DeLuca, Vinny the Pipe, received a package at his table. Inside was a small brown bottle of chloral hydrate and a note written in Bumpy's neat handwriting. "Next time you want to do business in Harlem, come to me directly." The middlemen keep ending up on buses to Florida. Carlo Gambino's attempt to establish a foothold in Harlem ended before it began. His three-number banks on 135th Street closed within a week. His collectors stopped coming uptown. His entire operation retreated back to Little Italy like a tide pulling away from a poisoned shore. And in a cemetery in Westchester, a new headstone appeared on a previously unmarked grave. Maria Moretti, 1929 to 1963, beloved wife, remembered in roses. Bumpy visited the grave once, alone, on a Tuesday afternoon when no one would notice. He stood at the foot of the marble stone for exactly 7 minutes, his hat in his hands, his face unreadable. He didn't pray, didn't speak, just stood there in silence, acknowledging a woman he'd never met who died and left her husband desperate enough to poison a king. When he turned to leave, he placed a single white rose on the fresh-turned earth. Not for Maria, for the memory of what love could make a man do. 3 weeks later, a postcard arrived at Bumpy's brownstone. No return address. Postmarked from Miami. On the front, a picture of white beaches and turquoise water. Paradise. On the back, in shaky handwriting. "I wake up tasting metal. Every meal. Every day. You were right. I'll never forget. No signature. None needed." Bumpy read it once, then fed it to the fireplace. Watched the flames consume the cardboard, the ink, the confession. Watched it all turn to ash. Mamie came into the parlor, saw the remains burning, understood without asking. "You showed him mercy," she said quietly. "I showed him consequence," Bumpy corrected. "Mercy would have been letting him keep the restaurant, letting him forget. I made sure he'd remember every single day for the rest of his life." "That's not mercy?" "No." Bumpy turned from the fire. "That's education. Angelo Moretti tried to drug me to save his wife's memory. I let him live to preserve mine. The difference is, I made sure he'd never forget the lesson." He walked to the window, looked out over Harlem. The streets were alive with people, music, life. His territory, his responsibility, his burden. "Revenge isn't about making people suffer," he said quietly. "It's about making sure they understand." Angelo understands now, and every restaurant owner in Harlem understands. And that understanding keeps everyone safer than any amount of violence ever could. Mamie joined him at the window, took his hand. "You're getting philosophical in your old age." Bumpy smiled. "Rare. Genuine. I'm getting tired, Mamie. Tired of teaching the same lessons over and over. Tired of men who think loyalty is negotiable. Tired of having to prove that poison in my food is a one-way ticket to exile. Then maybe it's time to rest. Maybe." He squeezed her hand. "But not yet. Not while men like Vinny the Pipe think they can buy their way into Harlem with blood money and broken promises." He turned from the window. "Not while there's still work to do." Look, if this story hit different, you already know what to do. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on those notifications because the next story will blow your mind. Drop a comment below. Was Bumpy right to let Angelo live? Should he have shown more mercy or less? Was the exile enough? Or should closing time have had a different ending? Let me know what you think. And remember, in Harlem, the tables had ears. The kitchens had secrets. And Bumpy Johnson always collected his debts. One way or another.